Hi there. I think the Yamaha R7 is uniquely dangerous for beginner riders. Now, why do I think that? Well, I just had the recent experience of putting this little motorcycle on my insurance policy, and it was actually 3 times more expensive to insure this motorcycle than the Ducati Panigale V4 that I just had on this channel. So this little 689cc CP2 $9,000 motorcycle is 3 times more expensive to insure. So that tells me quite a few things, right? It tells me that insurance companies are saying, whoa, Yamaha R7, that means you're gonna crash the damn thing. And I know that Yamaha R7 is one of the best-selling motorcycles the Yamaha has in their lineup right now. And I also know that many American beginner riders are looking at the R3 and they look at the R7 and they go, you know what? I'm going to get the big bike. I'm going to grow into it. I'm not limited by license laws. I'm not limited by anything because I got my freedom here in America. And so I'm going to get the big bike. And I started thinking, why does this motorcycle elicit so much crashing? Why are so many people having issues with this bike? And I have a few theories. And as a side note, I understand now why so many people create gas station content with this motorcycle, because it only gets about 110 miles to the tank. So you're going to be stopping for fuel quite often, and I guess they hit record and capture all the shenanigans at the gas station. So that's just a side note about the R7 and its peculiar place in the market. So I think the ergonomics are a big issue here. This is a very committed super sport style machine with a pretty stiff chassis, a nice little engine. It's a pretty fun bike. It's not as willing or capable as other motorcycles on the market. But the thing about this ergonomics and this setup is that in order for you to feel like you're having a good time with this bike, you have to ride it beyond 7 or 8 tenths pace. This bike is not very happy doing chill like 3 tenths, 5 tenths, even 6 tenths style riding. To have fun with this bike, you have to really push it. And I think anybody who rides it is going to feel that, because it's just not as rewarding to be in this super sport position and to not get your knee down and your head all the way over on the tank and, you know, really ride the bike aggressively as it deserves. And that's where I think a lot of the beginner riders are getting in trouble. Because if you go hunting for that and you don't have the skills to trail brake, to look through the corner, to properly ascertain your speed into a corner, you're going to get in trouble with this bike. And that's where I think a major reason is happening with people riding this bike. I think they're just entering it with really just not a whole lot of experience. And despite what people say online, despite what even Yamaha's own kind of marketing might tell you, I don't really think this is a beginner bike. It's really bleeding the limit of what a beginner should be on, especially because of the torque it has down low. You know, it's such a strange combination of, you have to really search for the power for this thing, right? You have to ride it in this like aggressive way for it to feel like it's actually doing something. But then at the same time, it has some pretty serious torque in the mid-range, about 40-something foot-pounds, right around 3,000 or 4,000 RPM. And I think for a lot of entry-level riders, that's just a bit too much if you're not familiar with throttle control. And although this generation has, you know, updated 6-axis IMU, it's got, you know, a lot of new rider features that give you more of a safety cushion. You know, nothing can really save you from target fixating off the side of the road. Nothing's going to save you if you enter a corner going 90 miles an hour when you should have been going 60, right? And you can't bleed off speed. No amount of cornering ABS or traction control can save poor rider behavior. And that's something I talk a lot about with safety equipment too. You know, people say, oh, you know, wear the best helmet you can. I'm like, absolutely. But if you hit a wall going 100, you're probably going to die, right? There's no helmet's going to save you from that amount of force to your body. And I just think this bike is, you know, it's causing issues for a lot of these entry-level riders. And it's being sold as this bike that is beginner appropriate. And sure, like it can be, but at the same time, I just find that it's going to be a problem for a lot of people. The other area I really struggle with the R7 to understand its place in the market and why I think a lot of beginners are having trouble with this bike, it's the fact that, I just had an MT-07 last year, the new generation bike, and they fixed a lot of issues on that machine. And I don't really understand the benefit of the R7 over the MT-07. I even took the MT-07 out on track, and I found it perfectly capable for the type of riding you would do with it, especially on road. It's more comfortable, it's got the same CP2, it's got the cool, like, Dark Side of Japan style, to it. And I'm kind of like, well, why would you go with the R7? You don't really gain any performance benefit. I think on road or on track, you're maybe going to get a 5% faster lap time with this thing, and around, some twisty bends and stuff. What really is the benefit other than looking cool? Which I suppose is a major benefit of this bike. It does look really cool, and I think a lot of people really like the styling. And so if you don't like naked bikes, you want a proper sport bike, I think Daytona 660, GSX-8R, those are some really solid options that, I think people who are looking at the R7 are maybe overlooking. And I guarantee you that Daytona 660, GSX-8R, and MT-07 all have phenomenally lower insurance rates than this thing. If you're looking to get this motorcycle, I highly recommend you get an insurance quote before you pull the trigger, because you may be shocked. I was shocked. I am in a very low risk category for motorcycle insurance. I'm 33 years old, married, homeowner. I've got kids. I'm the type of person that they in a way kind of hate, but they also love, because I'm never going to cash in on my insurance policy, right? A 22-year-old who is getting this as their first motorcycle, I can't even imagine, especially if you're financing this bike. My God, it might be more than your bike payment, to be honest. Comment down below. I'd love to know if you bought an R7 and you're a younger person and you insured it and you had to get full coverage because you financed it. Was it more than your bike payment? Because I feel like it's almost a guarantee that it was. So I really think you could just end up saving yourself so much money if you go for something that is maybe not as prone to problems and flashy as the R7. Now, really quick side note, a great way to get an R7 for free, so that way you have tons of money to spend on the insurance, is to win this R7 that I'm riding today. This is actually our latest sweepstakes motorcycle, and it is the very last day you have to get entered to win. So, if you were watching this video and you made it this far, consider yourself one of the lucky few, because this is a short sweepstakes, and odds are you have a pretty good chance of winning this thing. So, head over to the website, become a member, lock in your chances. We are probably running a very fun multiplier, so if you don't want to become a member, pick up a hat, a t-shirt, hoodie. Any dollar you spend will be an entry to win this motorcycle. And plus $2,000 cash too. So it's a free bike plus some money in your pocket. So even if your insurance policy is a lot, you can still pay up for it a little bit with the money I give you. So head over to the website and check that out. Don't miss it. It's the very last day to get entered to win. But yeah, the R7 remains an enigma. And I think in a world where there's really no longer readily accessible 600s, because that's what this kind of category used to be, right? Like if you went and bought a 600cc Super Sport, you were pretty much getting ready to be absolutely destroyed on your insurance rates and theft rates and all that stuff. The R7 really is just the new generation of that bike, because it still has the Super Sport styling. It's still very committed and aggressive, and it's the type of bike that elicits that higher insurance rate, elicits bad behavior. And one thing I was thinking about, I wish this data was more publicly available, because this new generation obviously has the 6-axis IMU, cornering ABS, all the safety suites that I mentioned earlier. And I wonder if this bike is going to keep people more safe, because the last generation R7, it had a cable throttle, no electronics. It was pretty bare bones, and I think that's really where a lot of riders got into trouble with it, because it really just didn't require a whole lot of electronics. And then you put an entry-level rider who has no experience managing the throttle on a bike that makes about 50 foot-pounds of torque at a very accessible low RPM. I think it's kind of a recipe for disaster. In a way, I think the ZX4 is a more safe option, because it builds the power more gradually. You have to flash the motorcycle to get the full power here in North America. And honestly, it's a more fun experience too. The ZX4 is just kind of a hilarious riot of a motorcycle, and this thing I really feel is, you know, it's not as humorful. It's a bit strange still, you know, and it's kind of like, would you rather have the inline four scream and that gradual buildup of power, or do you want this kind of hit of torque? And I think a lot of riders are choosing the hit of torque, but then, you know, not really that skill to handle it. And I do question, obviously we don't have a license restriction system here in the United States like they do in Europe and Australia and other parts of the world. I do question if we maybe had better rider training, if this wouldn't be as much of a problem for a beginner rider, right? Like, you know, maybe if we had an A1, A2 system, or maybe if we had, you know, a throttle limiter on this that made only about 45 horsepower instead of 75, and maybe a little bit less foot-pounds of torque, maybe that would be better for people, right? For me, obviously, like, I feel like this bike, it's a momentum bike, right? Like, you really gotta basically not use brakes and really get after it when you want to ride the bike fast. And it's fun for that reason for an experienced rider, but yeah, I can imagine a beginner would really get into trouble with this because of the combination of factors. But maybe that last generation was worse. Maybe now, you know, with the safety suites and stuff, maybe this is a little bit better for them. I don't know. But it does put itself in quite a weird spot, you know, because it's the super committed ergonomics and the vibe of this bike really suggests that someone much younger would want to own it and ride it. And with only 75 horsepower, it's not terrible, but it still is, I think, a second motorcycle. Like, I would much rather see someone, let's say, who's 22, 23, they buy a 500, they buy a 250, a 300 secondhand on Marketplace or whatever, they ride that for a year, and then they get something like this. This is a bit much for a first-timer at that age. And Yamaha did effectively lower their average customer age from 33 to 27 with this product. So the average new R7 buyer is 27 years old, which you're firmly a grown man at 27. You know, I think we have a kind of infantilization of our culture, but a 27-year-old man has had 9 years of being a legal adult. You know, they're post-college, they're probably working, maybe married, you know, like, I think we kind of have this idea that, you know, only like 50-year-old guys are like fully grown. But I mean, dude, a 27-year-old guy, if you don't have your head screwed on straight by 27, that's pretty rough, right? If you're making little kid mistakes at 27, that's kind of embarrassing. You should be making grown man mistakes, you know, like killing a man in Kansas City just to watch him die and then skipping town. That's a grown man mistake. It is funny because this bike makes way more torque than an R6, and I've been saying for years, and even when I started riding, everyone was like, no, an R6 is a terrible entry-level bike, even though a lot of Facebook squids would be like, dude, yeah, get on the 600, bro, you don't want to start on a 300, that's crazy. But, like, you know, 689cc twin punches way harder, way faster than a 600cc inline 4, and so, yeah, I feel like the low speed, like, jerkiness issues that a beginner would have, right? Like, second gear here, if you're just like that punches pretty damn hard. You really need to have pretty judicious throttle control. I feel like a beginner rider doesn't do that, you know? Like, they're still going to mess up opening the throttle on corner exit. They're still going to mess up their braking. Yeah, it's a weird package that has obviously, from the data, presented a pretty weird combination that's led to a lot of people crashing these. Yeah, even from an experienced rider perspective, like for me, for example, yeah, to have fun with this thing, you got to ride it super hard, and it feels like, you know, like, what is more dangerous? Is riding a 650 class bike at 8/10 more dangerous than riding a hyper naked at 4/10? I don't really know. You know, I think you're probably going the same average speeds, right, on road. Riding a hyper naked in a chill way is probably about as fast as riding a 650 class bike like this in an aggressive way. I guess if you have the skill, it's still within margin. Like, when I'm riding this bike, even in an aggressive way, I know that I'm not carrying too much lean angle. I've got plenty of brake. I feel like I got a good amount of grip from the tires, and it's good, you know, it's fun, it works. But at the same time, I don't know, I think riding a bigger bike more chill is probably safer than riding a little bike all bonsai. And I've said it before, but you know, any bike can kill you. There's a motovlogger that was around called Two Down Dan, I believe was his name, something like that. And he was a guy out of California with a Ninja 500, and I saw on my feed the other day that he had passed away. So, you know, dude on a Ninja 500 made some mistakes, and unfortunately it cost him his life. So I don't know if it's completely related to bike size and, you know, capability, but really more it's at the end of the day, always comes down to the rider. An experienced rider with skill, doesn't really matter the size of bike, you're going to operate it safely going down the road. Whereas an entry-level rider, you know, obviously it's more dangerous to put an entry-level rider on a bigger machine, but if you're the personality type where you start getting really comfortable with a motorcycle, but you don't have the skills to respect it, that's the dangerous combination, right? It's your classic Dunning-Kruger effect, right? You spend, all of a sudden, you're in the valley of despair after being, you know, very, very humbled by a motorcycle early on in your career. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Is this motorcycle uniquely dangerous to beginner riders? Why is it that so many people are crashing this bike in particular? And is there anything that can be done about it? Should Yamaha do anything to this bike to make it a little more beginner rider friendly? Like, should it change some things? I think adding all the electronic features and safety features was the right move in the right direction. But ultimately, riders are going to do what riders are going to do. And there also is the element of, like, I think this bike just attracts a certain type of person that is maybe more willing to take on risk on a motorcycle, right? Someone who wants a super sport bike, R-bike styling, they may already have a riskier profile than someone who is going to buy a GSX-8R or an SV650 or a Ninja 500. I'm not really sure, you know, but I do think that it's like the bikes choose the riders and the riders choose the bikes, right? Like, there's a reason S1000 RRs have the reputation they do, whereas Panigale V4s do not, right? Even though they're very comparable motorcycles. And I think the same thing with this, right? This bike has a reputation, its riders have a reputation beyond what riders of a Daytona 660 or a GSX-8R have. And that is kind of interesting, right? It's kind of like Suzuki's of days past, the Gixxers, right? Did Gixxer Squids go to Suzuki, or did Suzuki build a bike for Gixxer Squids? I don't really know. It's a chicken and an egg thing. All that to say, thank you so much for checking out today's video. I really do appreciate it. I wanted to just do a classic old school moto vlog and just come out and enjoy the bike a little bit more before I give it away. I've only got, I think, 128 miles on this odometer, so I really didn't ride this bike very much. I think I only did about 2 or 3 videos with it. 2 or 3 rides, really, just kind of called it a day. So head out to the website, check it out, get entered to win, because, yeah, it's minty fresh little R7 ready to go for you. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. I do appreciate it. I will catch you in the next one. See you later.